Tell us about how Studebaker sold it to every individual dealer.
Well, Studebaker Corporation said they'd put up half the money if the dealers put up the other half. And so this man, Steve Mudge, created this concept. Each dealer throughout America, when he sold a car, would put $50 of that profit into a fund. And that's how they financed the Mr. Ed show. It wasn't an expensive show. Nobody got, oddly enough, and this is interesting, I think, to talk money for a second or two. I talked to Jerry Van Dyke about this because I did a guest spot on a show with Jerry, and I realized what they were getting paid, $25,000 a show, $20,000, $50,000. He said, "You know what my brother got, Dick?" I said, "What?" $750 a week. I said, "So did I." That's all I got, and that's what they got paid then. I was fortunate that when the show goes over, you can rearrange things. And so you get little rearrangements made. And I was fortunate to get a piece of the show, which was very nice. But Dick Van Dyke got $750 a week for that show. He's not crying now because he's doing fine, but everybody thought, "Oh boy, you're making a fortune." And you weren't really.
I'm sorry. Everyone made a fortune except for Scott McKay. Tell us about how they went from Wilbur Poe to Wilbur Post. Tell us about the transition, changing the pilot to the series.
Well, we had a meeting in Al Simon's office. There was George Burns, Al, Arthur Lubin, and myself. And they said, "We want you to meet the lady auditioning for a leading lady." And they brought in Connie Hines, who was just the most beautiful thing, gorgeous. And we all, that's it. Now, Wilbur Pope. That sounded a little religious. So we'll change it to Post. Wilbur Post. About this name Wilbur. You want Wilbur? I said, "Well, if you want, you can use my real name, Angus." And they laughed. I said, "I'm not kidding. It's a nice name. No, it's Angus. Too ethnic." So they kept Wilbur, but changed it to Post. Wilbur Post.
And they changed your occupation.
We made up an occupation. I don't remember what the occupation was
Might have been lawyer?
in the story, in the books. But we had to figure out how I could live with this horse and not be around my wife, because she mustn't know he talked. So I'd have to live in the barn. What kind of job would you have in a barn? So I don't know who came up with the architect. Oh, anyway, somebody said, "Can you draw, Alan?" I said, "I can draw." I wanted to be a cartoonist when I was a kid. They said, "Okay, we'll make you an architect." And you have it right there. Well, we never used the architect gimmick at all during the whole series. But just having me sitting, I never got to draw anything. But that was the reason we changed it to architect, to get him in the barn, which was a perfect setting for Ed to louse me up and use my phone and everything else.
Not only were the actors recast from the pilot, but the star, the co-star, your co-star was recast.
Yes, well,
another horse.
Again, it was Al Simon who wanted just everything classy, and he got the finest large animal trainer in Hollywood, Lester Hilton. Lester had trained Black Beauty, and he was marvelous. And he was commissioned to find the best-looking horse he could find and the most amiable. Because as he told me later, when you want a horse, you don't want a trick horse. You want a horse that's nosy, inquisitive, and docile. And that's what Ed was. He was the nosiest character, but very quiet, very docile. So that's how we got, through Al Simon and Lester Hilton, we got Ed.
But that wasn't Ed's real name, was it?
His name was Bamboo Harvester, and he'd never acted before. I think he was a parade horse, had just done horsey things before. So it was quite novel. When the first time he walked on the stage, he's looking around, nosy as can be. What is this? But he was so quiet. One time I was sitting in the chair with Les, the trainer, and he was holding Ed by the reins, and they had great big light bulbs. I don't think they use them anymore, but great big bulbs. One of them fell. It was like a grenade going off. Pow! I went up in my chair. Lester jumped, And Ed simply raised his head and looked. What is that? It was the Greta Garbo look. That's the way she looked. She just turned slowly. And that was Ed's reaction always. Just, mm-hmm. It was beyond his comprehension, so he wouldn't bother with it.
Now the voice, where did we find the voice of Mr. Ed?
Oh, that was a big challenge. Because how does a horse talk? And the one who did the original, one who did the mule, Francis the Talking Mule, was, I forget his name now.
Chill Wills?
Chill Wills, a great actor. We couldn't use him. So that was a challenge. So one day we were out at Lester Hilton's spread, as they call it, his little ranch. And Lester was just a big-hearted man. He took in any old wrangler that needed a home, he'd take him in. And this man, Rocky Lane, had been a big Western star. I mean, big. Alan Rocky Lane. And he was on his uppers because Westerns had kind of faded away. And he'd faded with them because he'd been a star years before. And he was sleeping on Lester Hilton's couch. And that was it. So we're taking publicity pictures. And suddenly we heard this voice come out, "Hey, Lester, where'd you keep the coffee?" And everybody looked. Said, "That's Ed's voice." So Arthur and Al went to him and asked him, would he do the voice? Well, he allowed as he would, but he said, "I was a star once, you know. I don't want people to know I'm doing the voice of a horse." So they said, "Okay, we won't mention your name. You just do it." Well, when the show clicked, Rocky came to Arthur Lubin and said, "I'd like credit for this." So Al Simon said, "Well, you know, if you look at the credits, it says Mr. Ed played by himself. Wilbur played by Alan Young. Connie played by Connie Hines. Carol played by Connie Hines. Wilbur gets credit, but Ed is doing it himself, and the kids believe that. So we can't change it now." So they gave him a raise, and he was happy. So he never got any credit for that voice. And that's one of the main questions I'm asked. Who did the voice of the horse? Dear Alan should have gone along with it, I think.
But isn't the other question is, how did the horse talk?
Well, there are two other questions. Is Connie Hines really that pretty? And I say, yes, she is. And how does the horse talk, of course, is the first one, I suppose.
And what is the answer to that question?
Well, I started a big lie. I said, well, when you were a kid, did you ever get peanut butter stuck under your lip? Oh, that's how it's done. So I never really lied. I just asked him a question. But that wasn't true at all.
And what? And the answer is?
This is for the archives, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well,
for scholars down the road.
Lester had a knack. Even though he used a soft nylon thread put under the lip. And then he had the end going down the bridle, and he just give it a little tug, and Ed would try to get rid of it. That was his cue. And then he laid a crop across Ed's forelegs, and that was the cue to stop. That was it. For the second year, we could hardly stop him from talking. As soon as he heard my voice stop, his lips would start to go. I'd go ride. I learned to ride on Ed, and Lester and I'd go riding in Griffith Park together, and we'd talk as we rode along, and suddenly Lester laughed. And Lester didn't laugh very much. He said, look at Ed's mouth. When I stopped talking, he'd start to move his mouth. So he was a smart horse. I loved to ride him because, as I say, I learned to ride on him. I never used reins on him. I never used a hackamore just around his nose. I didn't use a bit. I would just say, stop. He'd stop. Right, Ed, turn right. He'd turn right. Go, let's go. He'd go. It was great for me because I wasn't a very good horseman. He was a better rider than I was.
How much time did you have to spend getting acclimated with Ed when you first got the part? Did you spend a lot of time getting to know each other?
Ed and I hit it off from the very beginning. I tried to feed him a carrot, and Lester said, oh, no, don't feed him. Not till you get to know him better, because you'll have to feed him during a scene. And if he gets to know you as the fellow with the carrot, he'll always look for something to be fed. So I wouldn't feed him. We talked, and I talked to him, and we just hit it off. He liked me. Ed had to get spanked now and again. Lester would have to, but he spanked him right just across the hoofs. And Ed was so upset at that. He'd come over to me and put his face right down here, his muzzle right here. And Lester said, you see, you're the mother and I'm the father. So that's how we got along. Whenever Ed was upset, he'd either look to me or come to me, which was great for the show.
Now, the other cast members, we talked about Larry Keating, but he was eventually not replaced. He passed away.
He passed away. We were doing a show where Ed teaches the Brooklyn Dodgers how to play baseball. And we played it out. They had just opened Dodger Stadium, and we shot out there. And that was Larry's last show. In fact, he told us, he said, I don't think I'm going to do the show much more. And so that was his last show.
And who was the actor that replaced him?
Leon Ames. Leon Ames was an MGM actor. He hadn't done any comedy before. He did Life with Father, a series. And I guess he auditioned for it because we wanted to get a stuffy man, totally different from Larry. He was going to be a colonel in the Air Force, so he played that part. That's how he got it.
And then Larry's wife was portrayed by actress Edna Skinner.
Larry's wife was Edna Skinner, and when Larry passed on, Edna stayed on the show, and we used her brother, played by Albertson. He did Chico and the Man.
Jack.
Later, Jack Albertson. He played a smart New York talking songwriter, song plugger. And that worked pretty well, but they wanted a husband and wife next door. And so they couldn't have her get remarried so she had to be let go.
And she was replaced by Florence?
Florence
McMichael?
Florence McMichaels, yeah. Who I'd never seen before, but lately I've seen some old television shows that she was on, and she was delightful. And she was delightful on our show. She played a kind of Gracie Allen, sort of airheaded little gal, and she was such a dear. But we had a very small cast. Just the five of us, including Ed. We had a few guest stars come on, of course.
We'll get to that in a moment. I'm curious to know about some of the writers. Lou Derman was your head writer. Your relationship with Lou again was a wonderful working
my
relationship.
relationship with Lou was just about as harmonious as anything could be. I respected him as a man, and he was funny. He was a great magician. He wasn't a great magician. His brother was, but Lou thought he was, and I just loved him for it. He would do the famous sponge and balls trick, and you could see it going up his sleeve, But you just loved him for his what do you call it? Naivete, I guess it was. So we wouldn't tell him that we knew his tricks. He would, as I told you before, he didn't mind rewriting. And there's a cute thing. He loved Ed so much, and he loved Wilbur, because he wrote one scene where I was trying to get Ed out of his stall. He wouldn't come out. He locked himself in. So in this show, I lit a cigarette and blew smoke under the door and said, "Fire, fire!" That would make Ed open up. And we rehearsed. It made me sick because I didn't smoke. And Lou came on. He said, "I'm going to rewrite this. It doesn't look good to have Wilbur smoking." That's the way he was. And in our first show, Larry and four of us sitting around playing cards, and we had drinks on the table. And Lou said, "I don't think it's good to see you people drinking either." That's the way he felt about this family. He was a great guy.
Also, Larry Ryan made...
Larry Ryan, yes, and his wife...
Hazel.
Hazel played on the show. She played the telephone operator quite a bit. Funny character. And Bill Davenport was one of the writers. There was another one that...
and George Burns' brother for a season.
Willie, of course, yes. And Larry, there was another one I can't... Anyway, they were lovely guys. They contributed greatly to the show.
But what also contributes so wonderful to the show is that theme song.
Yeah, that was written by the same people who wrote Aaron Slick from Pumpkin Creek. And it wasn't a hit in the whole picture. And they wrote this theme song. I don't know whether Jay Livingston Ray Evans, of course. I don't know who the singer was that did the soundtrack. But his voice was so good, they said, let's keep him in. So they didn't have to get a singer to do it. Either Jay or Ray did it. I don't know which one. And
it was originally an instrumental, wasn't it? And then they added lyrics?
I just heard it. I heard the music played first, yes, but then I heard the song. And I had a songwriter friend come to me. He said, you know, this is after the show's been on the air a little bit. I can write a song. That's awful, that song. That is terrible. He said, look, I'm a songwriter. I know a good song. That'll never go. Well, Livingston and Evans have made more money out of that song through ASCAP than they told me than any of their other numbers.
Let's talk about a typical work week, if there is such a typical work week when you're working with a horse. What was the production schedule and where was it shot?
A typical work week was Monday we'd sit around with Lou. He'd come in with the idea, and we'd either like it or not like it, but generally we liked it. And then do publicity, because Tuesday we'd rehearse Monday for the show coming up. Read over Monday, rewrite Tuesday, rehearse Wednesday, shoot Thursday. That was the schedule. Friday, get the idea. Friday we got the idea for the next show, and then over the weekend Lou would write it. And that's how it went. We shot in a little studio called General Service Studios on Las Palmas. It's called something else now. We loved it because it was like a little family. Very small studio. Ozzie and Harriet had stage 5, and we had stage 6. Raymond Burr had the cottage and another stage. So those were the 3 shows being shot on. The Raymond Burr show was the attorney,
Perry
DA.
Mason.
Perry Mason. It was wonderful because he had the little cottage. He'd have to get in there to memorize all those lines. He'd be there at 4 in the morning, and he'd have coffee brewing for anybody who wanted to pop in. We were spoiled. We wouldn't get there till 7:30. But it was such a nice thing. And Ozzie and Harriet next door, Ricky and David loved the horse. And they were a great bunch to be with. We get a kick out of Ozzie Nelson because he directed all his shows. And they have a term in making motion pictures where they say, let's cheat over this way. When there isn't enough room for the camera, we'll cheat over this way. A funny story about Ozzie, he didn't like that word cheat. No cheat, build more sets, that's all. So they shut down when they built some more set for him. He spent a lot of money on his shows, and they've never been released because he said, this is my family's album. So that's the way it's going to be. So he never sold his into syndication. So we worked with some very nice people.
Now, when was Mr. Ed brought onto the set? Only on the day of filming, or was he involved with any rehearsal?
He was a lousy writer, so we never used him for that. I'd drive in behind him with his trailer. It said Mr. Ed. I'm Mr. Ed on the side of it. People would go by and honk. And I'd drive behind him, and I could always tell how Ed felt, because if his tail was outside the board they used to keep him in there, he was ready to play. His tail would be flying in the breeze. If his tail was tucked in, I know Ed didn't feel too much like playing today. But he never changed. He was always good. It was such fun to see the people honk and wave to him. But he only came in on show day. He didn't rehearse. He had no stand-in. They bought a stand-in called Punkin, but Ed, he did his own work.
How did they determine whether Ed could do a feat or this scenario would work with Ed if he was not involved with rehearsals or run-throughs?
Lou would always call, if there was something difficult, Lou would always phone up Lester and say, Lester, can you do this? And Les allowed as he could do it. And if something was a little difficult, Lester might make a suggestion that, well, maybe you could do it this way, and Lou would rewrite it. We had a scene in the car wash, which was a very dangerous scene, as we found out later. And Lester got him to go through the car wash with all the cars and get soaped up and washed down, and just Ed took it all. But Lester said, that was dangerous. If that horse had slipped, I'd have punched Arthur Lubin right in the nose.
One thing that makes a show work is Wilbur Post. As you mentioned, he didn't smoke or drink. What are some of the things? Why is he one of our favorite characters? His attributes?
Because he loved a horse. I think that's what it was. He loved animals. I mean, here's a horse that decided there shouldn't be any more zoos and released all the animals. Where did he release them to? To my place. He released all the birds once, and my house is full of birds. And poor Wilbur had to walk in there and try to tell his wife that, oh, they're nice birds, you know. I think that's, people love that. They love you if you love an animal. So I think that's what Wilbur's qualities were.
And then, let's go back to that George Burns quote. Please repeat the quote what George Burns said about Alan Young. Do you think that also applies?
Alan Young looks like the man a horse would talk to. Yeah, I guess so. Because at the time, I had a spread down the road here, about 4 blocks. It was an acre, and I had Minx, a little pony, because I had to learn to ride finally. So I bought a little horse, so I'd give Ed a break. And I had 7 dogs, 3 cats, and 40 birds. So I guess it all brushed off. I used to get, they had a trick dog on a show with Mr. Ed, called Nip and Tuck, 2 dogs that did tricks. It was a magic show, and if anybody has seen that show, we have the little poodle, tiny little thing, mutt really, and that was Tuck. Nip didn't do anything. That was his whole act. He just sat there and watched the other dog and looked sad. And I spoke to, I said, "What's wrong with this little dog?" The man said, "Oh, I'm going to have to give him away because he's getting a trauma. His psyche is getting all bruised by this." I said, "Well, I'll take him home." So I took the little dog home. He smelt to high heaven because he'd never had a bath. And I used to drive in with my stand-in, and he said, can I sit in the back? And I said, "You sit in the back," and opened all the windows. I got him in my house, brought him in. The kids went, "Oh, boy." So I took him down and shoved him in the bathtub and bathed him, and then he was happy. But I got a lot of the animals from this show. Some birds that looked like they were damaged. So I was running my own zoo.
Seems like you were Wilbur Post and Wilbur Post was Alan Young. It seems you have the same qualities.
I used to get kind of mixed up about that, yeah. In fact, my wife looked like Connie. People when I take my wife out somewhere, they say, "Oh, that's Carol," but it wasn't.
I'd love to talk about some of the episodes. The first episode was called The First Meeting, where Wilbur discovers Ed can talk. What do you remember about shooting that very first episode?
Oh, that was my favorite. That scene where he says, I say, "Gosh, it's wonderful having a horse. Oh, when I was a little boy, I always wanted a pony. It's been a long time since I was a little boy, and I hear this voice say, 'It's been a long time since I was a pony.'" And I loved the chance to do pantomime. What was that? No, I didn't say that. The horse says, "Did you say it?" No, I didn't. And the whole discovering that was, to me, my favorite scene. And because later on I made such a fool of myself by telling my wife, "Come on in here, watch him talk," and he wouldn't talk. And now she thinks I'm nuts. That was fun.
And how was the show received right away?
Oh, the opening night, Bill Conrad, who played the Fat Man on television, was a great friend of Larry Keating's. And my wife was a great friend of his wife. So they invited us to their house to watch the opening. And we sat there, and Bill's show was just being dropped, finished. We watched it, and of course, you look at yourself and you want to change things. But I liked the show. I liked the opening one. And I remember Bill turned to Larry and me, and he said, "Well, looks like you two are going to be together for a long time." And that was a big thing to hear from him, because his show had been dropped, and we knew then that we had a hit. Although the press didn't regard it that way. It got, I think, panned quite a bit. Silly show, but the public liked it.
The public must have liked it. You went from syndication to the network shortly afterwards.
Yes. There's an interesting story about this business with television. After the first year, we were dropped. We had I don't know, 65 comes to mind, but that sounds like a lot of share. Our share of sets in use was phenomenal. But we're dropped. We had no sponsor. Where do we go? So Al Simon was having breakfast in the with with somebody in Beverly Hills Hotel. And he saw CBS men at a table. I'm trying to get this story straight, because one of them was Aubrey, Jim Aubrey, who was the head of CBS. And he came over to the table, say hello to Al, and he said, "How are things?" And Al said, we haven't got a sponsor." And Jim Aubrey said, "Oh, we're just making up the schedule for next year. I think you got a show." So if they hadn't been in, maybe it would have happened anyway, but they happened to be there. And next year we were bought by CBS, and they gave us a time spot. And this is no credit to me, but it's a credit to Ed. Lassie was slipping in the ratings, and Lassie was followed by Ed Sullivan, that was slipping in the ratings. So Jim Aubrey said, "I'm going to put Mr. Ed ahead of all of you. It won't be prime time though, so you'll never have a rating taken, but you'll be a lead in for us." So the Ed show started in, and Lassie's rating went up, Ed Sullivan's rating went up, and they'd stay on the air for a long time after that. So we credit dear old Ed with that. And all over the world, it was 7 or 8 languages. Ed spoke French, German, Japanese. We had some people come from Japan, and they were surprised that Ed spoke English, because the dubbing was so beautifully done by the Japanese that they thought it was a Japanese voice. Of course, in Japanese, I had a very low voice, and Ed had kind of a high voice. That was their sense of comedy.
The last episode before of syndication starred William Bendix, which was a pilot, wasn't it? Called The Pine Lake Lodge?
Yeah, yes, it was we did 2 pilots. One was dreadful. I forget, it was a cartoon thing. That was Pine Lake Lodge, yes, with Bendix. Another lovely guy. I met just such nice people. I forget who the rest of the cast were. George something. Anyway, but Bill Bendix was such a good character actor.
And then you worked with Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Zsa Zsa, that was not a pilot. That was a very interesting show. She she was a good horsewoman, and yeah, it was good.
And then you got to work with your boss, George Burns.
Yes, yeah, that was a big thrill. He didn't direct it. He took the direction. He said, "Arthur, you can direct me." And on that show, it's interesting because the little girl that played the telephone operator or secretary to George Burns was a girl called Tate. Sharon Tate. And I see that show sometime, and I miss her.
You had some wonderful guest stars, and we're going to talk about that in our next reel.
Sharon Tate, yeah.